Bardas. Ignatius, however, refuses to cooperate with this. He does not agree to force anyone against her will to go into a monastery, and this provokes Michael and Bardas to act against him. They charge him with high treason, ship him off to an island, a nearby island, and pressure him to resign. And it is at this point that the subject matter for which will become the Eighth Ecumenical Council, the Fourth Council of Constantinople in 869-870, arises. It is a controverted point because even contemporary historians, this time the contemporary sources that are otherwise reliable, are not in agreement over exactly what happened. On October 23, 858, Ignatius resigned his post as patriarch. But did he do so willingly, or was he under grave threat? Did he do so under duress? Was it a free action? So it is perfectly legitimate for a bishop, a patriarch of Constantinople, to resign his office if he does so willingly. But one cannot be coerced or forced to resign and that be a legitimate resignation. So if Ignatius resigned under grave threat to his life, let's say, then his successor would be an illegitimate successor, and the actions of the Pope to support Ignatius would be seen as a continuation of the traditional advocacy of the Pope in Rome for legitimate office holders. And St. John Chrysostom in Constantinople is a case in point of about 450 years before. The Pope broke communion after the Emperor and Empress exiled St. John Chrysostom. His replacement was an illegitimate one, so there was precedent for this even in the See of Constantinople. It seems, though, that Ignatius resigned with some qualifications. So it seems that he agreed to step down if the following conditions were met: that he would not be prosecuted, he would be left alone, that his acts, everything that he had done, would not be overturned, that they would be respected, and the bishops that he had consecrated and put into various sees surrounding Constantinople would also be respected. And from the very first day, it was clear that these conditions were not going to be met. They were going to be publicly rejected. So that bishop back in Sicily, Gregory of Syracuse, was brought in to be one of the co-consecrators of Ignatius' successor. So in the eyes of everyone looking, this is a direct rejection of Ignatius and what he has done. And his successor is a man by the name of Photius. Now, Photius was unquestionably the most talented and intellectually gifted man of the 800s, particularly in Constantinople. He wrote extensively on many things, particularly philosophy and literature, a very lettered man. However, he was not involved in the ecclesiastical affairs prior to being named Patriarch of Constantinople. He was not particularly known for his heroic virtue or his a life of piety. He was very brilliant, though, very talented, very capable administratively, and he had a very great grasp of the use of words, which makes his position in the history of the church one of interest. What happened exactly, and what was his role in it all. So Photius, after he is consecrated, ordained, first deacon, priest, bishop, all in a very short span of time, a few days, he writes to Pope Nicholas I, who is the Pope at the time, and seeks to be recognized as the legitimate patriarch. And he explains in his letter how Ignatius has resigned, legitimately resigned, and that He himself had not sought this office, but such pressure was put upon him by all sides, by the clamor of the other bishops, the imperial administration. He just didn't see how he could resist, how he could say no any longer, and be a good servant of God. So he willingly accepts this office and wants the Pope to know that he is now the sitting patriarch. The Emperor, Michael the Drunkard, also sends a letter very quickly, and it's perhaps the second immediate letter which causes Pope Nicholas to raise something, his eyebrows to raise. Okay, well, maybe Ignatius did resign. But why these two letters? And it appears that someone's protesting a little too much. So Pope Nicholas I sends legates to Constantinople to find out the full story, find out exactly what has taken place. And the legates, those representatives, as soon as they arrive, find themselves intimidated, treated with less than full courtesy, and being pressured into signing off on what what Photius has to say about his legitimate succession. Photius himself calls a local synod and rounds up various people to testify against Ignatius, and why he saying things that ultimately many of them retracted, but all in an attempt to show that everything was legitimate at this point. Now, Ignatius himself was in a prison. He was certainly not free, and news of Ignatius' imprisonment, when this leaked out and got back to Rome, Pope Nicholas I sided with Ignatius, because all the evidence seemed to point to this meddling by the emperor in the office of Patriarch of Constantinople. And that Pope Nicholas I, to uphold that tradition of being the source of unity in the church and the court of appeals for any diocese in the world, even other patriarchates, that Pope Nicholas speaks out on defense of Ignatius as the rightful Patriarch of Constantinople. And he declares Photius an illegitimate successor and essentially deposed. He sides with Ignatius. Photius is suspended, and all those involved with his consecration are likewise suspended, and those, including the papal legates who have gone along with this synod, this pseudo-synod in Constantinople. And this reaction is not taken well back in Constantinople. It is seen by many as meddling by Rome in the illegitimate affairs of another diocese. And Photius, who, as we said, was not particularly known for his piety before, his devotion to the church, unleashes his talented tongue, full of venom against the Pope and the church in the West, and writes a vitriolic screed and has it distributed to the other patriarchates in the East and many of the dioceses in the East, denouncing the Pope, denouncing the meddling of Rome in the proper affairs of Constantinople. He goes so far as to call a synod of his own and attempts to excommunicate Nicholas I from the rest of the universal church. And he then, in that synod, he gets 21 bishops to agree with him, and they sign a letter excommunicating the Pope. And the story goes that Photius was not satisfied with this, and therefore forged another 1,000 names to it before sending it on to Pope Nicholas. So at this point, 867, things are not in good relation between Rome and Constantinople, or as those at the time may have called it, the New and Old Rome. To make matters even more confusing,